My intention is to make sure that we are intentional, take the temperature down, depoliticize the discussion about where they should go, and really just concentrate on what the workers themselves need structurally versus assuming that it can be within one department or another here.
Well, that's Seattle City Council Budget Chair Teresa Mosqueda talking about parking enforcement officers. She wants to keep them as part of the Department of Transportation, at least for the time being. And that would be a change to what Mayor Harrell first proposed here. So what's up with that amendment? What other council members are stepping up with amendments? Which of them aren't? And do we finally have some answers on the redistricting changes coming to the city of Seattle? All this and more considered this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine. My co-host, David Croman, is enjoying some family time off, and in for him is Kevin Schofield from the South Seattle Emerald, does a weekly column there. And Kevin, I know I promised a special guest last week, but we're going to have to put that off by another week. So I just wanted to ask you, could you be extra special this week? Can you come through on that?
You gotta make requests like that in advance. I need to work on it. I can't, I shaved this morning, but
that's special.
Maybe
that's good.
I don't know if it's extra special. But.
I'll take it. Kevin, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. John, great to see you last week. Hang in there, man. If you are a listener, please do become a patron. Join at the $10 level and become part of our mug club. A big shout out to intern Rob, again, showing some big love to the show this week. We're going to show you one of his classic mug shots as our mug shot of the week, a cornucopia of support from Rob. Thank you, sir. And a quick note from Converge Media here, folks. Check this out. The Washington State Homeowner Assistance Fund, the HAF, is ready to help you out if you're behind on your mortgage due to COVID-related problems. We've all had a few, right? Well, if you qualify, you can get up to $60,000. They've got counselors ready to help out in multiple languages. So call the hotline at 877-894-4663 or go to washingtonhaf.org. All right, let's get rolling with right here, right now. So, Kevin, we are in the thick of budget amendments and all those horse trading pieces that go along with that. I want to talk about where those amendments are coming from in terms of which council members are bringing them up and where the money could be going. I found it very interesting, folks. Kevin pointed this out to me. In Councilmember Strauss's case, at least, a move to make some investments in the Inner Bay neighborhood. Inner Bay, wait a minute, that's not in his district, in District 6, but it could be when these new redistricting maps are in place. And we will talk about that at the end of the show. So why not push for $10 million to get some new turf at Inner Bay Stadium? Kevin, just some thoughts about this, where you're seeing some of these amendments landing and who they're coming from.
Yeah, part of this at this stage, now that the council members are really getting down to brass tacks, like, okay, what amendments are we going to make?
Right.
7 of the city council members are up for election next year, the 7 district-based positions.
Mm-hmm.
And, in every year you see the district-based council members doing, I guess, what we would expect them to do, which is being out there fighting for the district and putting in some amendments that benefit their district, getting some good earmarks in there. I think in some cases we're particularly seeing that this year. Given that elections are, this is the budget that they're all going to be campaigning on starting next spring, right? So we're seeing Councilmember Strauss got a bunch of earmarks in for District 6, including, as you mentioned, some neighboring parts of Magnolia, which is going to be really important if, as it looks like it's going to happen, a major portion of Magnolia is about to move into District 6.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing Councilmember Morales from District 2 put out a whole ton of different transportation, in particular, and a little bit of human services earmarks for her district in the south part of Seattle. Councilmember Sawant hasn't really, she's got almost nothing for her district in terms of amendments that she's putting in.
She's been walking on some stuff, but they're more general topics. From
they're more general. And she always walks on a bunch of stuff because it gives her another opportunity to give a speech about that, right? So she doesn't like sort of going through the regular process. She walks on everything because then she gets to talk. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. Some trickle of earmarks from some of the other district-based council members. A couple from District 1 with Herbold, a couple for parks and a little bit of transportation from District 4. with Peterson.
Yep.
Not as much as I would expect this year from Juarez in District 5. She usually has a ton up there, but maybe at this point, she's taking a little bit of a break for a year because she's gotten a lot in the last few years, right? She's really made a big difference for District 5 the last few years. So maybe not quite so much this year, right?
Just letting I know she's talked about not running again after this term. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I did want to, can I jump onto some bigger topics here, Kevin, when it comes to the budget? I just kind of wanted to look at it, maybe some of the main pushbacks, if you will, from the council when it comes to this. Not major differences with the mayor here, but I think they represent some different thinking. I'm going to look at the Jumpstart payroll tax with you first, the parking enforcement officers and the unified care team. So let's try to put those aside. It's not Jeopardy, though. I'm going to pick the topic to start. So let me jump in with Jumpstart. The mayor is talking about this as a permanent answer to general budget shortfalls. I'm hearing the council saying, well, wait a minute, let's try using Jumpstart for this year, but we need some other options in the year ahead. Does that about sum it up?
Yeah. And so they're kicking the can about 2 years down the road.
Yeah.
With the rule now has been, the payroll tax revenues, during COVID, they said, okay, we need to use this for emergency purposes to maintain a bunch of the funding that we're doing and add some more programs. But that was supposed to end this year. So starting in 2023, the payroll tax is not supposed to be a source for sort of general fund supplementation. But, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, revenues have not recovered to the level, of general fund revenues that we would expect, right? So in order, and this council and this mayor don't like cutting programs certainly more this council than this mayor. The mayor's okay getting a few programs here and there and sort of giving everybody a haircut. This council doesn't like doing that. They don't like saying no to people, right? So they're, going through the couch, behind the couch cushions, looking for extra change to make sure that, they can sustain funding and everything. So they don't have, nobody can be accusing them of, quote unquote, austerity funding.
Okay.
Or austerity budgeting and this stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So, because apparently these days, if you cut anything, it's austerity budgeting. Right.
Yeah. I suppose you look at it that way.
So, so now what we seem to be hearing from the budget chair, Councilmember Mosqueda, who is of course the original author and sponsor of
Jumpstart
payroll tax, was okay, maybe for the next 2 years, as we get, they've clearly got a little bit of a fiscal cliff they're running off of because they supported a lot of funding with a lot of the expenses they were doing for the city with one-time funding.
Yeah,
right?
COVID stuff.
And one-time funding, COVID related, federal funding, things like that, that have now gone away.
Yeah.
So, we will see 2 years from now. And that's 2 years from now, Councilmember Mosqueda is going to be running for re-election.
That's right.
Potentially, if she decides to. So we'll see what happens 2 years from now with revenues as well as that.
And that's a big piece, and it leads me to this next question here about these parking enforcement officers here. So just the backstory here, folks, as you recall, we've talked about it on the podcast. Big problems earlier this year, putting this group into SDOT, the Department of Transportation. These illegal tickets were written, cost the city millions of dollars in lost fines. And the mayor is saying, all right, just put them back in SPD and put $20 million essentially back in the SPD's coffers here. Council Budget Chair Mosqueda is saying, well, let's hold off on that. Keep them in SDOT for now until we find a permanent home. And the soundbite, you heard it off the top of the show here. Councilmember Mosqueda is saying she's trying to depoliticize this discussion over police funding. She doesn't want to undo this small step that the council worked on last year to right-size the police department, as the council would put it, keep police officers focused on fighting crime, not writing parking tickets. What do you make of this pushback from Councilmember Mosqueda when it comes to parking enforcement officers?
Well, so let's be clear from the beginning. This isn't a budget issue. They're dealing with the budget issue, almost as a matter of convenience because they have to figure. But this is a change they can make any time in the year.
Yeah.
Right? The mayor rolled it into his budget, so maybe he's the first to blame for trying to make this a budget issue when it really isn't. But it's a policy issue of where this, and at some level, it's a very political one about do we want more things in the police department or in other places? But the reality is, when you talk to parking enforcement officers, in many ways they are still part of SPD. Their uniforms still say Seattle Police. Their parking enforcement vehicles that they drive around still say Seattle Police Department on them.
Right.
And
still
a lot of the
there,
stuff
from what I understand. Yeah.
They're still housed there. And a lot of what they need to actually do their job, including access to information about, when they're looking up, license plates of vehicles and, and, potentially whether there's a criminal history or outstanding warrants for the owner of a vehicle that they come across that's illegally parked. Can they get access to that? And under SDOT, they've actually been having trouble getting access to some of those systems. So what the mayor has said is part of the reason to move them back into SPD is to solve a bunch of the problems. And, you could potentially do a bunch of paperwork and find other ways to get them access to those systems, but there are some issues with getting access, some logistical and legal issues with getting access to people outside of a police department, a recognized law enforcement agency, access to databases of criminal histories and outstanding warrants and things like that. So so the mayor is really saying logistically, like, we can have a conversation about the right places to be and the right way to do it, but we rushed this change last year and it didn't go well. It's causing problems for the parking enforcement officers, and they overwhelmingly are saying, at least in the short term, they want to be back in SPD. And Mosqueda and some of the other council members are saying, no, let's not.
They don't like the looks of that.
Let's not move them back in SPD just to turn around and move them somewhere else.
Potentially 12, 24 months later.
Which is it will be putting the onus back on the mayor and the Herald administration to go figure out all those other issues to really make it work within SDOT. Right. And then potentially having to do that again if they move it over to the CSCC.
Right. Which is where they've been talking about going potentially to the communications department. So again, another issue I'm going to put in a box for a little while here, but I wanted to talk about this one last piece, Kevin. The mayor's plan to put about $5 million towards the Unified Care Team. This is a group that coordinates outreach, deals with community complaints on garbage, fires, etc., around unauthorized homeless encampments. So the council's saying, okay, how about 1.2 million of that amount? That was going towards new staff. Let's move that towards the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, because the KCRHA is supposed to be working on that outreach part. The city's working more, or that should be working more, on garbage cleanup, etc. What do you make of this back and forth between the council and the mayor?
Well, so the thing that people have not been saying about Mayor Harrell's plan to create this Unified Care Team and to staff it up is that the Unified Care Team is looking an awful lot like the navigation team used to look.
Just call it another name.
They're a mix of people doing outreach as well as organizing encampment removals, what some folks call sweeps, right? And so, this is hearkening back to the whole argument, nasty political argument that we had over this a few years ago. And where do you put, if you want to do outreach before encampment removal, and if you want to do outreach in particular on the day that encampment removal is happening, where do you place it, right? Most of the outreach right now is, almost all of it is outsourced to third-party organizations. There's a couple of system navigators inside this Unified Care Team right now. And the reason that they're there is because the third-party human service providers who are doing outreach said very clearly, we do not want to be there on the day that encampment removal is happening, because it tarnishes our image, right? All this trust that we build with homeless individuals to be able to help get them the services that they need and get them off the street really gets hurt if we're seen basically side by side with the police when they're tearing down encampments.
I remember this back and forth with Reach, a few other groups. Keep going.
And that's why the city brought created a small number of these system navigators inside of this, before they called the Unified Care Team, the predecessor of it in the last, several months of the Durkin administration, because they were then city employees, and rather than outside third party, outreach provider, who they can make sure there was someone on site on the day of an encampment removal, right? So we're, there's a set of folks in the city who would like to have no encampment removals or no sweeps happening at all, right? Certainly Harrell isn't going to go in that direction, right?
No, he's not. And
it's not clear even today, after the heavy backlash from that, whether even a majority of the council would back that, right? So what has been suggested is putting these system navigators, and
Mm-hmm.
in fact, what Mayor Harrell wants to do is have enough of them so that there can be one.
Regionally, like in different parts of the city.
Mm-hmm. 5 or 7 different. I think it's 5 different regions of the city.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Where there's dedicated resources to each of them, so different parts of the city are not fighting with each other
for resources.
Outreach and encampment removal resources. We can do it everywhere in the city.
Yeah.
So in order to get there, Harrell wants to staff up that organization. And so what Councilmember Mosqueda is suggesting instead is, let's move that money over into the amount that we're funding the King County Regional Homeless Authority, and let them provide that outreach instead of doing it in-house.
Right.
But the King County Regional Homeless Authority has really not been happy about the notion of providing outreach or asking third-party homeless human services providers to provide outreach on site on the day of our encampment.
Right.
So you may just come right back around to the same place again.
RHA doesn't want to be involved in sweeps either. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nobody wants to do this. And yet, the city feels like they need to be doing this.
Yeah.
So they're staffing it in-house as basically their best option to move forward with it. Right. And city council, at least some of the folks in city council, are still not happy with this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a budget battle over the next several weeks here. And I appreciate you jumping back and forth with me on those big topics here. But we need to move on to another piece here, Kevin, because I really want to get your insight on this. The reconfirmation, actually, of Gino Betts as the new leader of Seattle's Office of Police Accountability, the OPA. What's happening in council this week? Well, that's coming up on Now Hear This. Okay, so Gino Betts was sworn in as the head of the OPA for Seattle a few weeks ago, but that covered him to merely finish out the role that Andrew Meyerberg was pulled out of by the mayor, and that term was set to end in December of 2022. So Betts has to be reconfirmed by the council this week so he can serve the new 4-year term that starts up in 2023. Got it? Great. Well, I thought it was a good time to revisit the future of the OPA. And I actually had the chance to sit down with all of the candidates that were involved with this earlier this year, including Gino Betts, to talk about police accountability. So Betts is from Cook County, Illinois, Chicago area, and he told me his work as a prosecutor and his own personal life are two important things he brings to the job.
I have the experience of being a prosecutor that shapes my view on police accountability. I also have the experience of being a black man or a black boy raised on the west side of Chicago. So it's the personal and the professional experience that I'm bringing to the table that gives me a very balanced approach.
Well, Kevin, I touched on this appointment when Gino Betts was sworn in October 3rd right here on the podcast. But I would really like to get your perspective on this because Gino Betts seems like the kind of leader who wants to put his work in the public eye. He led community forums, some contentious ones back in Chicago. And I just wanted your take on this. Where do you think he takes the role as the lead of the OPA?
I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. He's made some very big verbal commitments to transparency.
Yeah.
And we'll see he can deliver on them. There may actually need to be some changes in the law made in order for him to do that. One of the things that there was a frequent criticism of the OPA under the prior director was that it was in many cases too lenient on police officers. It was too quick to sort of defend them and their actions and how much discretion they have. And it sounds like Gino Betts is going to be tougher on a lot of those. We'll see if that's really true. We'll see whether he said that he wants to release more video and more information about cases earlier on so people can see almost immediately what happened and have a higher level of transparency around that. One of the issues he's certainly going to run into, and this is going to sound very familiar, is SPOG, the Police Officers
Union, Guild,
right?
The union.
A lot of the restrictions on transparency, on how these kinds of investigations happen, disciplinary procedures are all in that contract, right?
Yeah,
so
all negotiated.
He is going to be bound by that, and the arbitration procedures and all that. So we will see how that plays out. There hasn't been any word in the last few months about how those negotiations of a new contract are going with SPOG. Right now, our police officers are working without a contract again.
Almost 2 years.
And, we'll see how long it drags out this time. Right?
Yeah. I guess looking at that, those larger issues, those challenges ahead for the OPA, I know this office has been through a lot in the past year. South Seattle Emerald tracked some of these complaints surrounding the office of the OPA, the office of the Inspector General. There's always the consent decree to consider here, but we now have a permanent police chief in Adrian Diaz, and I'm just trying to figure out, are things going to settle for a bit, or what happens? What are those big hurdles that Gino Betts faces, like right out of the gate here? What do you think about that?
So I think one of the things that both our new permanent chief, Adrian Diaz, and Gino Betts are going to be faced with is operationalizing a lot of the recommendations that have come out of the George Floyd protests,
right,
and the riots that happened, and the police dramatic and violent over response to those protests. Right. The OIG has now put out their Wave 3 report. So they're of their 4 reports that I think they're planning to do, they now got 3 of them. Each has a long list of recommendations for changes that need to happen. SPD has been working on some of them already. Some of them are going to be very controversial. Some of them, again, are going to require probably some changes in the law and in the SPOG contract to get done. So how much does Diaz and does Gino Betts push on getting those changes made faster?
Yeah, I can't wait to watch what's going on there, because it's been very interesting to hear from Gino Betts, hear about how he wants to make this office more public and have some more accountability going on there. But it will be the money happens when the action happens. So we'll see what goes on there. But let me move on to one other piece with you here, Kevin, because I want to make sure we updated our listeners about the redistricting process. And folks, if you were looking for a magic answer for reunited the community of Magnolia, doesn't look like that's happening. I want to talk about this most recent map, Kevin. There was a small update early this week, actually on Halloween, and it still looks a little spooky for that area of Southeast Magnolia. Basically, kind of split down the middle here. What happened here? I know. Don't be overcome, Kevin. Please tell us what you got.
So the redistricting committee has gone to enormous pains to meet the set, occasionally conflicting set of requirements for defining the new districts. They need to be contiguous and not, a gerrymandered shape. They need to respect, to the extent possible, the existing boundaries of the districts, so they're not just
be a
randomly
similar
changing
size.
things. Existing, street arterials and natural boundaries like water boundaries, neighborhood boundaries. And there are places where these things come into conflict, because they also have to make sure that all 7 of these districts are almost exactly the same size in terms of population, not in terms of area, but in terms of population. So you're kind of fiddling with the edges right now. The biggest they worked very hard, based upon a lot of lobbying from the community, to keep historically underrepresented communities together and not pack or crack them. But to do that, a large community called Magnolia ended up getting split apart. Many of the residents of Magnolia complained bitterly about the fact that their neighborhood was although their neighborhood is about 14,000 people and is one of the largest neighborhoods. So it was in retrospect, it was probably inevitable that it was going to have to
change there
at some point. So most of Magnolia is moving up into District 6, and there's still a small part in the southeastern corner which is going to stay in District 7, which is where it is now.
They're carving out just little blocks right now,
along with sort of the Inner Bay stretch just to the east of Magnolia, right there. And that has been controversial, and a lot of the machinations in the last month have been the redistricting commission members trying to figure out if there was some way they could keep Magnolia whole without undoing their work in other places. So they've gone through iterations of, can we pull part of Fremont down into District 7 instead? Can we there was a proposal just this past week that was rejected to move University of Washington District 4.
That one. That would have been pretty big.
And there aren't a lot of people who actually live on the UW campus.
True.
Right.
Okay.
Because a lot of the students are actually registered to vote somewhere else.
Yeah. Right.
But there are a lot of renters. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of sensitivity for underrepresented neighborhoods is making sure that
say.
homeowners don't have more political clout than renters do in this city.
Yeah.
So where they ended up, they made one last change on October 31st, earlier this week, that just basically tweaked a little bit of this border between D6 and D7 in southeast part of Magnolia. But other than that, they seem to be done. And they're looking to take, the Redistricting Commission is looking to take their final vote on next Monday, on November 7th. Or I think it's 7th or 8th, something like that, early next week. And then they'll be done. And that gives them about a week before officially under the law they're required to be done with this process. So they're coming down the wire. It looks like they're all done. Former Mayor Greg Nichols, who is one of the Redistricting Commission members, voted no on sort of their current state of the map, because he objects to splitting Magnolia across districts. But other than that, all the all the commission members seem to be behind it. So it looks like this is
4-1 on that vote. Yeah. So moving forward, and we'll see what happens there when they submit these maps to King County and the state by November 15th. The first time Seattle has done this redistricting process. So it's been fascinating to watch here. All right. Well, coming up, what do we got? We are talking about, well, are we going to see a surge in COVID cases this winter or what? Roll up your sleeves, everybody. It's time for What's Next. Well, Kevin, I think back to when we started this podcast in 2020, and 2 months later, it was COVID time. It was crazy. There I was with Kevin like, hey, how can we get together and do this? And it's like, and we're doing this over Zoom. Anyway, these things happen. We got vaccinated. I am thankful we survived because millions of people did not. Always try to keep that in perspective. But here we go into a third year of COVID, our state and city emergency declarations ending this week. And it just had me thinking, what is next? What are your expectations for the winter? Are we looking at another surge in COVID cases, or what's happening?
Well, it looks like we could potentially have a triple whammy here.
Yeah.
We could have another winter surge in COVID cases. And the COVID part is really interesting because we seem to be in a different stage. And when you look at the variants, there are about a half dozen different variants of Omicron that are all seeming to establish themselves. Some more here, some more in other parts of the world, which is to be expected at this point because we've got different vaccinations in different parts of the world. And we've got different treatments in different parts. So it is actually spreading differently in parts of the world. Even though
there's different symptoms behind it too. Yeah, I just want to
there's different symptoms for some of these. They moved away from some of the classic
lost my
symptoms
sense of taste.
More of like running, what you think of as flu, right? Sore throat, runny nose, things like that, which is really kind of different than sort of the chest lung congestion that we saw early on. So it's looking a little different, though. Long COVID still seems to be a thing with it. So we've got COVID, and we'll see where that goes. None of the sort of new Omicron variations really seem to be taking off, right? The even though they're all kind of asserting themselves, and the one that's been the big one for the last several months, BA.5, seems to be dying down. The overall count of COVID cases is not really going up. Right. Okay. So that's a good sign. Everybody should still get vaccinated. Absolutely. Go get the new bivalent vaccine. Go get that booster. That's really, really important to do. So then number 2 is we've got flu. We're going to the winter. That's flu season every year. And this year, the health officials are very worried because we've had super low numbers of cases of flu for the last 2 years because everybody's been masking up. Everybody's been staying home.
I see.
Not circulating. So the number of flu cases last 2 years has been really bad. And what they're worried about is that kind of the latent immunity to flu that carries over a little bit from year to year may be gone. Because nobody's had it for 2 years. Right. So they're really worried that everybody's out and circulating again. We could have a super bad flu year. So while you're out there getting that bivalent COVID vaccination, get a flu shot as well. I've gotten both. Got them both at the same time. It wasn't a big deal.
No.
Go do it. and it could really save you this winter on that.
Yeah.
And then the third thing,
third piece. Yeah. What do you got?
is there is a respiratory virus that's going around.
Yes,
referred to as RSV. They're still kind of figuring out what's going on with it, who's getting it. It's hitting a lot of kids.
I was going to say young
schools
people are
pretty
getting hit
hard.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely out there and circulating. So be careful. We're still learning more about that, but it's out there, and people and public health officials are starting to get a little worried about it.
Yeah.
So be careful about it. If there's no vaccine for it yet. They hope at some point there might be, but so we got potentially a triple whammy here.
Yeah.
Mostly we're not wearing masks. We're not required to wear masks. The emergency COVID emergencies have lapsed now.
Right.
They lapsed earlier this week. So now, although you will find out if you go in medical facilities, you probably still have to wear a mask. Potentially a few other places. It's up to private organizations to decide what their policy is going to be about that. Please respect that. Be prepared for different, different organizations, having different rules around that. So, even if you're not going to wear a mask, keep a mask with you just in case you're trying to get in some place that's got a stricter rule about it. But, just be careful out there. Get vaccinated, wear masks if you're around a lot of other people, and it's going to keep you healthier this winter. And that's going to be a really important thing to do.
Hear you loud and clear. Well, we need to wrap up here, Kevin, and I've still got my Mariners cap on, but I actually kept my Seahawks shirt on here too. I just want to make sure I show it off.
I got my Kraken hat. I
love it. I love it. No, I was going to say, at least with the M's and the Seahawks, what are the odds that we talk about both of those teams making the playoffs this season? I throw it out there, man. That's a pretty big, bold thing there. Any thoughts on
everybody a month ago? Everybody had counted out the Seahawks, but they seem to be just roaring back. They're what, 5-3 now?
I know, sitting on top of the NFC West. I mean, right? You think about the Mariners in June looking as terrible as they did, and they brought it back. So
well, although they did get a penalty in this last Seahawks game. The Mariners.
That's true. Wasn't that awesome? It's the coach of the Seattle Mariners is like, no, dude. That's Pete Carroll. He's been there for a little while.
That would be the Seahawks. Yeah.
That's great. That was great. Well, Kevin, thank you. Thank you as always. And thanks to everybody listening. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can always find out what's brewing in local politics right here. The podcast is on all the major platforms. Look for Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media too. See you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.